Howdy everybody, and welcome to part 2 of our Mega Man tutorial. So last time we set up our input object and we set up our camera, so what are we going to do next? We got our input object, what we do next. So let's get cracking on that. Come over to your objects and of course, object underscore input, create. And we are going to actually add a group here as well, and we're going to call this, game objects. Kind of game objects would be things that are in the background and they work, but they don't really display or anything. So, at least that's what I kind of am calling it. Basically, things that are made in the init are going to be game objects. Let me see if I can open the input. There it is. And if you want to grab all these, copy them over into game objects. There you go. Object input, give it a little sprite, miscellaneous, and we have a little keyboard in here. There you are. And give it a create event. Come back to our camera object here real quick. Remember to set that to persistent. Same with our input object. That's what all these init objects are going to be, persistent, because we want them to carry over to our later rooms. Now I've slightly improved the keyboard, I think. So it'll be a bit more different. It'll be a bit different and a little bit wordy, but hopefully this will make it universally applicable to any NES or SNES type game. So that would be a nice bonus for it, so you can work with NES games as well. We're going to start off by creating a states. And we're going to do none and standard. Add some user events for this. So no input and standard input. You use the no input for stuff like whenever you're doing a transition and you don't want the player to be moving around or something, and anything else where you have that going on. State underscore is equal to input underscore states dot standard. And let's do some zoom in here. Alright, so I'm going to copy and paste a bunch of this code into here because it is very long and it is a lot of basically copy paste work. So first off, we're going to actually create this. We're going to create a variable here, gp underscore id underscore is equal to no one. We'll need this so that we can add a gamepad input. We are not going to be setting up multiplayer. I was trying to do that with the Chip and Dale tutorial, then I decided, that's too much bother unless I'm actually going to make a full real game. So we'll just settle for one player for now. So we're just going to use GPID in there, and that'll be no one, and it'll be set to the ID of our gamepad whenever we detect one. So add a region, and this will be your inputs. And we're just going to start with our key right, key up, key left, key down. Key A, B, X, Y, L, right. So that would be the shoulder buttons. Start and select. And I've set them to keyboard binds here. And the reason why I've set up all these keys with a keyboard bind like this is that way, if you wanted to in your game, you could set up a system so that you can assign this variable another variable if you wanted to change what the input was for a key. So you could change this to OR J if you wanted to use J as your right key by using a script or something. And you do the same thing for all of these. Then we have, so ORD, that would be our keyboard position, VK enter, and VK right shift. I specify right shift instead of just shift in general, so that way if you hit the left shift, it doesn't do anything. And we're also going to set up the gamepad in the same way, except now it's going to be gamepad right, gamepad up, etc., etc., etc. And here's all the gamepad buttons. And these, well, this is what it should be according to the help file, which shows all these things right here. So we have the phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, phase 4, and so on and so forth. But it can be different depending on your gamepad. Like my gamepad, it was very different because there were some things broken with because they don't have it supported properly in the IDE. So I'll show you how to set up a custom gamepad in a custom gamepad binds in a second so that you can get it all to work properly every single time. And last but not least, we're going to put in all of our events. So board inputs and gamepad inputs. Last but not least, we are going to put in all this stuff. So this would be our pressed events, our hold events, and our released events. So right pressed is equal to keyboard check pressed, key right, up, key up, left, down, etc., etc., etc. Same with the hold event, which is keyboard check instead, and our released events, which are released. And each one of these are important for their specific field. All right, let's see what we can do next here. That's everything for the create event. So let's go over to the begin step event. So I've changed how I set up some things in how I order things in this tutorial, the Mega Man tutorial, versus how I did it in the Chip and Dale tutorial, because it makes it more robust against me accidentally setting something up so that it does a input before it's able to read the input for that frame. So by doing this, we have the begin step, event underscore user state underscore. So we execute our state in the begin step event, and all player objects and anything that interacts with inputs in the future will not use the begin step to do that. They all have to be done in the step event or later. All right, I hope that makes sense. If it doesn't, leave a comment as usual. And let's see, I have a bunch of different things in here for debug purposes that I'm trying to skip over. Like if you press escape here, I'll just put this in because it's very useful. Just key pressed, others, escape, game underscore end. That's very useful there, but not really important. All right. So we'll go back to our user event 0 here, no input. This is very easy, very simple. Just clear all the inputs with 0. So if 0 false, is nothing going on with that input. And that's just these values here copied and pasted into here with a 0 instead of checking for whatever's in there. And we kind of do the same thing for standard movement, except we segregate it for gamepad. So as you can see, right pressed, etc. We are checking to see if there's input each frame. And we case it in if GP underscore ID underscore is equal to no one. So if a gamepad isn't detected, then check your keyboard. But if a gamepad is plugged in, then check the gamepad. And again, these are all exactly the same as right here. I didn't include these over here because, well, I didn't. So, but you could just copy and paste it, and it's exactly the same right there. You check a GPID and GP ride, GPID, GP up, etc. Anyways, that was really easy there. We're almost to the end of that area. So this is actually an improvement. So previously I was doing my input buffers, and I believe I've made them much simpler and easier to use now. So input buffers, if A is pressed, alarm 0 is equal to 2. And if alarm 0 is greater than 0, then A pressed is equal to true. So I got that down to 2 lines of code, and that works for my input buffer. Same thing for the B. And we'll need to put in our buffered alarms as well. So alarm 0 and alarm 1. You can even name them if you want. A buffer, B buffer. Now pop up over here in a second. There we go. So we're almost done here. We got our create event, our begin step, alarm 0, alarm 1, and a bunch of debug stuff, event 0, event 1. So last but not least, we need to detect if we've inputted, if we've plugged in a joystick. So we're going to use asynchronous events for this. I'm going to create an async system event. Make sure you see that. And we are going to check to see if a gamepad has been plugged in. To do that, we use a little bit of code. So what does the system async event do? So whenever something happens that's in the system async domain, it sends out a DS map that has a value event type. So I can take the value in that event type map key, and then I can print it out. So event is equal to whatever the event is. In this case, we are looking for an event that is gamepad discovered. If the gamepad discovered event happens, then we can also use this ID to determine the pad index that was plugged in. Then we can throw that stuff into a switch event. Hide that for a second. So we switch on the event, and if the event is gamepad discovered, then we set up our gamepad. If it's gamepad lost, so if you unplug the gamepad, then we reset our GP system. So we set GPID to our ID that we had discovered there. Then I have a couple of variables that you set up here, dead zones and thresholds. These are things that would be set upable in modern gamepads and modern games. But as far as the NES goes, you didn't have that option. And in gamepad lost, we also reset our GPID. So we set it to no 1. That way, we go from using the gamepad back to using the keyboard. And it's all seamless. So earlier I talked about, okay, well, if we have a gamepad that isn't supported by GMS2, what do we do about it? Well, we set up a custom bind. So in this case, I've set up if gamepad underscore get underscore GUID, GUID is equal to this. This string here is an ID that is specific to my gamepad type, serial model. It has it in the firmware, and it's able to detect that when you plug in the gamepad. Then in this case I set up so GP mapping is equal to this, and my ID is equal to this, and my description is equal to this. These are all just some debugging stuff but the most important part here is mapping here. We have to set up a mapping string. So we set up our gamepad ID plus a comma there and our description again from there. And then we add to that all of our custom binds. So in this case, I had to set my A button to be B1, my B to be B2, my X to be B0, my Y to be B3, left shoulder B4, right shoulder B5, and I had to base. So each one of these, let's see, there's the important function right there. Gamepad test mapping. That is what you need to set up for setting this. That's the function you need for setting up custom binds. So you set it to your gamepad and your mapping that you've set up. This is a string literal there. It's just so that I can do multi-line instead of just a single, instead of having to have it all as a single line. And make sure you don't forget the commas. And let's go back to this. So you can read over this stuff if you want later on for yourself. Let me zoom out so it's easier to see. So here's where I was talking about with SDL names and GML names for the different buttons, and then you can set up your bindings. This is what their sample looks like. You can even set it up specifically for like Android or something if you have an Android controller. Anyways, so that's all you need to do to be able to set up your gamepad. GPID is equal to ID. And that's really all you needed. You don't even need these parts if you don't want them. You can just cut that out. There we go. And that's all of the input setup. Again, if you have a question, don't forget to leave a comment. I'd love to talk to you about it. So we're in 17 minutes here. I think that's good. Nice and long, and I hope it has been very informative for you. It is, yeah, it's all of our stuff we need for doing the input. And this should be a very versatile input system for a NES or SNES style controller. So if you ever have any games that want to use that kind of system, or Game Boy as well, it also works for that. And Game Boy Advance, and it would work for NDS as well, and DS Lite, and probably the entire DS lineup. Might even work for the Switch, actually, now that I come to think about it. The only thing it doesn't do is have it doesn't cover a joystick, but that's easy enough to put in there as well, just by itself. So anyways, input done, and tomorrow we are going to go back to here, and we will probably put in the transitions and music manager, because those are both fast. We've already set the transition object before, and the music manager is going to be nice and interesting. I've talked about it with a lot of people, and they've all been very excited for it because it is a very versatile system I have set up for this as well. So come back for the music manager. And I'd like to give a special thank to my patrons. I'm grateful for your support. It really helps with making this project go forward. And I'll get you a end screen that will insert into these videos very soon here to show your names and all that fun stuff, but I just finally got all this stuff working. So after getting my monitor, after my monitor was broken for a while, so haven't had time to get it all set up yet, but we'll get there. Thank you everybody for watching, and good luck with your programming.